Some secrets are buried so deep they become part of the land itself, waiting in silence until someone brave enough comes along to unearth them. For 62-year-old trail guide Dellen Hart, that moment arrives when a lightning fire reveals something impossible, a tunnel sealed into a granite cliff hidden for over 2 centuries. The concrete seal bears no record in mining maps or town history. Armed with her late brother's field diary and a weathered pickaxe, Dellen breaks through alone. What she finds inside isn't treasure, it's something far more personal. The discovery forces her to confront what her family tried to forget and what her hometown swore to bury. But once inside, one thing becomes clear. She wasn't the first to break in, and she might not be the last to try getting out. What could be so terrible that an entire town would hide it for 200 years? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe. Tomorrow's story is even more remarkable. Dellen Hart woke to the familiar creak of her Ford F-150, the sound of metal settling in the cold mountain air. Through the frost-edged windshield, dawn painted the peaks above Ashford Ridge in shades of rose and gold. She'd parked last night in her usual spot, behind the shuttered gas station on Highway 82, where nobody bothered her and the owner looked the other way. At 62, she'd grown accustomed to this life, sleeping in the extended cab with her winter gear as a pillow, washing up in gas station restrooms, living lean and quiet on the margins of a town that had never quite accepted her. She sat up slowly, her back protesting the awkward sleeping position. The truck's interior smelled of coffee grounds, trail mix, and the particular mustiness of well-worn hiking boots. Everything she owned fit in this vehicle. Clothes in a duffel behind the seat, camping equipment in the bed, and a small lockbox containing her brother's field diary, a few photographs, and the deed to a piece of land she'd never been able to develop. The land sat 3 miles outside town, inherited from her parents, but without the money to build on it or the heart to sell it, the property remained as wild as the day they'd left it to her. Dellen climbed out into the sharp morning air, her breath forming clouds. She was a tall woman, lean from years of mountain living, with iron-grey hair usually pulled back in a practical braid. Her face bore the weathered look of someone who'd spent more time outdoors than in. Lines carved deep around her eyes and mouth, some from squinting against high-altitude sun, others from grief she'd never quite processed. She moved with the careful economy of someone managing chronic pain, a legacy of 3 decades working as a trail guide and, before that, 15 years as a park ranger. The town of Ashford Ridge sprawled below her vantage point, a collection of wood-frame buildings and newer tourist trap constructions clustered along Main Street. Population 1,847, according to the weather-beaten sign at the town limits, though Dellen suspected that number included a generous count of second homeowners who only appeared for ski season. The place had started as a silver mining camp in the 1800s, boomed briefly, then settled into a long decline before reinventing itself as a gateway to wilderness recreation. The old mine operations were long abandoned, their tunnels sealed and marked with warning signs, their tailings slowly being reclaimed by forest. Dellen locked the truck and walked toward the general store, which opened at 6 for the handful of locals who started work early. Lloyd Pritchard would already be inside, brewing the first pot of coffee and arranging the morning pastries from the bakery 2 towns over. Lloyd was 73, silver-haired and perpetually dressed in flannel shirts and suspenders, a fixture in Ashford Ridge for his entire life. His family had been here since the beginning, one of the founding families, as he'd mention whenever the opportunity arose. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. Lloyd looked up from behind the counter, his expression neutral but not unwelcoming. "Morning, Dellen. Coffee's almost ready." "Much appreciated, Lloyd." She grabbed a banana and a protein bar from the shelf, items she could eat while driving out to the trailhead. Her first group of the day was at 8, a family from Denver wanting an easy 2-hour loop with good photo opportunities. "Heard there was quite a lightning storm 3 nights back," Lloyd said, pouring coffee into a paper cup. "Up on the eastern ridge. Started a good-sized fire before the rain put it out." Burned about 20 acres, from what I could see, Dellen replied. She paid for her items, counting out exact change from the small stash she kept in her jacket pocket. I'll be checking the trails today, making sure nothing's blocked. You be careful up there, ground's unstable after a burn like that. Lloyd's pale blue eyes studied her with an intensity that felt like more than casual concern. Lots of old mine shafts in that area. Things can open up when the soil shifts. I've been hiking these mountains for 40 years, Lloyd. I know where the dangers are. I'm sure you do. He handed her the coffee. Still, some things are best left alone. History buried itself for good reasons. The comment hung in the air between them, peculiar and weighted. Before Dellen could respond, the bell chimed again, and Renata Cole entered, bringing with her the scent of lavender perfume and old books. Renata was the town librarian, late 50s, with dark hair going elegantly grey, and the careful posture of someone who spent their days among fragile things. She'd moved to Ashford Ridge 20 years ago, from somewhere back east, drawn by the mountain air and the promise of a quieter life. "Morning, you two," Renata said, heading straight for the coffee. "Dellen, I'm glad I caught you. Someone was asking about historical trail maps yesterday, the old ones, from before the Forest Service took over. I thought you might have copies from your ranger days." "Depends on which trails they're interested in." Dellen cradled the warm cup between her palms. "What's the research for?" "Didn't say specifically. Just interested in early settler routes and mining access roads." Renata exchanged a quick glance with Lloyd, so brief Dellen almost missed it. "You know how it is. People get fascinated by local history." Dellen nodded, but something about the exchange needled at her. In 15 years of living on the edges of this town, she'd learned to read its rhythms, to sense when the old families were circling wagons around some piece of shared knowledge. Ashford Ridge had secrets the way mountains had stones, so many they became part of the landscape, invisible until you stumbled over one. She'd stumbled over plenty in her time here, though none that explained why her younger brother, Danny, had died on these mountains 15 years ago. The official report said he'd fallen while hiking alone, his body found 3 days later at the base of a cliff on the eastern ridge. Accidental death, case closed. But Danny had been an experienced climber, cautious to a fault, and in the weeks before his death, he'd been obsessed with something he'd found in the town's historical records, something he'd tried to tell her about in increasingly urgent phone messages she'd been too busy to return. That failure haunted her more than anything else in her life. She'd been working a search and rescue operation when Danny died, out of cell range for 72 critical hours. By the time she'd gotten his messages, by the time she'd driven down from Wyoming where she'd been stationed, her brother was already in the ground, and the sheriff had ruled it an accident. No investigation, no questions, just condolences, and a box of Danny's personal effects that included the battered field diary. She now kept like a talisman. Dellen had left the Park Service 6 months later, unable to focus, unable to trust her judgment after failing the person who'd mattered most. She'd drifted back to Ashford Ridge because it was the last place she'd spoken to Danny, because leaving felt like abandoning him twice. The town tolerated her presence. She was useful as a guide, knowledgeable about the backcountry, but she'd never been invited into its inner circles, never trusted with whatever truths the old families guarded so carefully. She finished her coffee and headed out. The morning was brightening, sunlight spilling across the peaks. She drove her truck up the winding mountain road to the eastern trailhead where her clients would meet her. The burned area was visible from the road, a dark scar on the mountainside where lightning had struck a dead pine and the resulting fire had consumed the drought-dried undergrowth before the storm's rain extinguished it. The family from Denver arrived right on time, parents in their 50s with college-age kids who looked mildly resentful about being dragged on a nature walk. Dellen gave them her standard introduction, covering basics about altitude, hydration, and staying on marked trails. She'd learned to read groups quickly. These were easy clients, more interested in getting away from phones for a couple hours than in any serious hiking. They started up the trail at a comfortable pace. Dellen pointed out landmarks, identified trees and wildflowers, told sanitized stories about the area's mining history. The work was automatic after so many years, requiring only a fraction of her attention. The rest of her mind kept drifting to that burn zone, visible through breaks in the forest canopy. After she'd returned the family safely to the trailhead and collected her fee, Dellen made a decision. She had no other bookings until tomorrow. The afternoon stretched before her, and that burned section of ridge had been calling to her since she'd first seen it from town. She loaded a day pack with water, first aid supplies, and basic climbing gear, then drove to an unmarked pullout she knew from her ranger days. From there, a game trail led up toward the burn zone. The hike took 40 minutes, climbing steadily through unburned forest before emerging into the blackened landscape. Fire had a way of revealing things. The intense heat consumed surface vegetation and leaf litter, exposing bare soil and rock. Dellen moved carefully through the ash, aware of hidden hotspots and unstable ground. The fire had burned hot here, reducing everything to charcoal and ash. Even the larger trees were reduced to blackened spikes. She was working her way along the base of a granite cliff face when she saw it. The fire had burned away a dense thicket of scrub oak that must have been growing there for decades, and behind where the thicket had stood, set into the cliff face itself, was an opening. Not a natural cave mouth, but something unmistakably constructed, a rectangular entrance perhaps 5 feet high and 3 feet wide, sealed with concrete that had weathered to a mottled grey. Dellen approached slowly, her heart beginning to pound. The concrete seal was old, cracked in places but still intact. Around it, forming a kind of frame, were stones that had been shaped by hand, cut and fitted with precision that spoke of skilled labor and deliberate purpose. The construction style looked nothing like the rough rockwork typical of mining operations. This was older, more carefully done. She pulled out her phone and took photographs from multiple angles, then examined the seal more closely. No markings, no dates, no indication of who had built this or when. But the hand-cut stones suggested early 1800s at the latest, a time when Ashford Ridge was barely a settlement, when this area was still contested territory between expanding American claims and the Ute people who'd lived here for generations. Dellen pulled out Danny's field diary from her pack. She'd read it so many times she'd memorized most of it, but she flipped through the pages now with fresh urgency. There, a sketch Danny had made of what looked like a tunnel entrance, with notes beside it. Check Eastern Ridge. Old maps show nothing, but locals won't talk about it. 3 family crests matches charter signatures. Why sealed? Her hands trembled slightly as she held the diary next to the sealed entrance. Danny had found this, or he'd found something like it. And in the weeks after he'd made these notes, he'd died. The sun was dropping toward the peaks. Dellen knew she should leave, come back with proper equipment and maybe someone who could help her understand what she'd found. But the thought of telling anyone in town about this discovery made her instinctively cautious. Lloyd's warning that morning echoed in her mind. Some things are best left alone. She stood in the ash and char, staring at that sealed entrance, and made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, she would come back. She would bring tools. And she would find out what her brother had been searching for when he died. The mountains held their secrets close, but Dellen Hart had run out of patience with silence. Dellen returned to the sealed tunnel before dawn, her truck loaded with tools she'd collected over years of trail maintenance work. A pickaxe, a pry bar, a sledgehammer, work gloves, and a powerful LED headlamp. She'd told herself all night that she was being foolish, that she should report the find to the Forest Service or at least bring someone with her. But every time she considered it, she thought of Danny's notes and the way the town had closed ranks after his death. Whatever this was, it belonged to her brother's memory first. The hike up took less time in the pre-dawn darkness, her headlamp cutting a narrow tunnel through the black. She knew these mountains the way some people knew city streets, every switchback and landmark mapped in muscle memory. By the time she reached the burn zone, the eastern sky was beginning to pale. The sealed entrance looked more ominous in the early light that weathered concrete like a scar across the granite. Dellen set down her pack and pulled on the work gloves, then hefted the pickaxe. The concrete was old enough that she hoped it might be brittle, weakened by centuries of freeze-thaw cycles. She chose a spot near the edge where the seal met the hand-cut stone frame and swung. The impact jarred her shoulders, but the concrete cracked satisfyingly. She swung again, then again, finding a rhythm. Chunks began to break away, revealing darkness behind. The work was harder than she'd anticipated. Whatever mix they'd used to seal this had been well made and had cured solid as bedrock. Sweat soaked her shirt despite the cool morning air. Her back screamed protest, but she kept swinging, driven by something beyond logic. After an hour of steady work, she'd opened a gap large enough to shine her light through. Cold air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of deep earth and stone and something else, time itself, measured in dust and stillness. She expanded the opening until she could squeeze through, then paused to catch her breath. Behind the concrete lay another barrier, an iron plate, perhaps 3 feet square, hand-forged and dark with age. Dellen brushed away the concrete dust, and her breath caught. Etched into the metal were 3 symbols, family crests, rendered in careful detail. Below them, words in Latin, Silentium pro perpetuum. Her high school Latin was rusty, but she could work it out, silence forever. She pulled out Danny's diary and compared the crests to his sketches. Perfect matches. 3 families had sealed this tunnel, marked it with their symbols, and sworn eternal silence. The date stamped into the iron read 1804. Dellen photographed the plate from every angle, then examined its edges. Unlike the concrete, which was mortared into place, the iron plate appeared to be bolted to the stone frame behind it. The bolts were heavily corroded, but she thought she might be able to work them loose with the pry bar. It took another 40 minutes of careful leverage before the first bolt gave way. The others followed more easily, and finally the entire plate shifted. Dellen pulled it free and set it carefully aside. The opening behind exhaled another breath of cold air, and she shone her light into a hand-cut stone corridor that stretched back into darkness. Her hands shook as she adjusted her headlamp and checked her water supply. Every instinct told her this was dangerous, that she should mark the location and get help. But help from whom? The sheriff who'd ruled Danny's death an accident? The town elders who clearly knew more than they'd ever shared? No. Whatever waited in that darkness, she would face it the same way she'd faced everything since losing her brother alone. Dellen squeezed through the opening and stood in the corridor. The stonework was extraordinary, walls cut smooth and straight, the ceiling a precise arch. This was the work of skilled craftsmen, not rough miners hacking through rock. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, and in that dust she saw something that made her heart hammer against her ribs. Footprints. Bootprints, relatively fresh, leading deeper into the tunnel. Someone had been here within the past few months. Someone had found a way in, or perhaps had never needed to break through, perhaps had held a key to this sealed place all along. Dellen knelt and examined the prints carefully. They appeared to be from hiking boots, men's size by the length, with a distinctive tread pattern. Coming and going, she counted 3 separate sets of tracks. Multiple people, or one person making multiple trips. She followed the prints deeper. The tunnel ran straight for perhaps 50 feet, then opened into a wider chamber. Here the natural cave system met the hand-cut passage, and Dellen could see where ancient builders had smoothed the transition, creating a space that felt almost like a room. Stone shelves lined one wall. A blackened area on the ceiling spoke of old fires. This had been more than a tunnel. Someone had used this space for extended periods. On the floor near the wall, she found the first artifact, a silver locket, half buried in the dust. She picked it up carefully, brushing away centuries of accumulation. The locket opened at her touch, revealing a miniature portrait painted on ivory, a young woman with dark hair and eyes, indigenous features rendered with clear affection. Inside the lid, an inscription in flowing script. D.H. My heart remains. Dellen photographed the locket, then pocketed it carefully. She continued searching the space and found more. Scraps of rotted fabric, broken pieces of pottery, a child's wooden toy carved in the shape of a horse, evidence of habitation, of life, lived in this hidden space. But why? Who would choose to live in a sealed tunnel, or the darker thought, who would be forced to? She moved to examine the far wall and found scratches in the stone. Words carved carefully, some in English, others in a script she didn't recognize. The English read, Daniel Hawthorne, trader, Denali of the mountain people. Our children, James and Sarah, sealed here by those who would steal our land. May God judge them for this sin. 1804. The same year, stamped on the iron plate, Dellen's mind raced, trying to piece together what she was seeing. A family had been sealed in here, deliberately imprisoned. She photographed the inscription, her hands shaking with anger and horror. This wasn't just history, this was a crime, 2 centuries old, but no less terrible for its age. A sound echoed from somewhere behind her, rocks falling, distant but distinct. Dellen spun, her light cutting wild shadows across the chamber. The sound came again, closer. Someone else was in the tunnel. She killed her headlamp and pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding. Light flickered from the entrance corridor, another headlamp, growing brighter. Footsteps, careful but audible in the silence. Whoever it was, they were coming straight toward her position. Dellen weighed her options, fight or hide. She was 62, and alone, with no idea who or how many people might be coming. She spotted a narrow crevice in the far wall, barely visible in the darkness, and squeezed into it just as the light swept into the chamber. The figure that entered moved with the confidence of someone familiar with the space. Dellen caught a glimpse, male, bulky winter coat, face hidden by the headlamp's glare. He moved directly to where she'd been examining the wall, played his light over the inscription, then pulled out a phone and made a call. Yeah, it's Tally. She's been here. Found the inscription chamber, left footprints all over. A pause. I don't know how she found it. The seal looked intact yesterday. Another pause. We can't just leave it. If she tells anyone, if this gets out. His voice dropped lower, harder to hear. I know what my father did to her brother. I know. But we don't have a choice now. The Hart woman knows too much. Dellen's blood turned to ice. Tally, Sheriff Boone Tally, the man who'd investigated Danny's death. And he was talking about his father doing something to her brother. Not an accident. Murder. The sheriff finished his call and began searching the chamber methodically, his light sweeping every corner. Dellen pressed deeper into her crevice, barely breathing. The light passed within inches of her hiding spot, then moved on. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Tally left the way he'd come. Dellen waited in the darkness, counted to 500, then crept out. She had to get out of here, had to get this evidence somewhere safe, but as she moved back toward the entrance corridor, she heard a sound that chilled her, the scrape of stone on stone, the thud of something heavy. She ran forward and found her worst fear confirmed. The entrance was blocked. Someone had rolled a boulder in front of the opening, sealing her inside. She pushed against it desperately, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped in the same place that had imprisoned the Hawthorne family 221 years ago. And outside, Sheriff Tally knew exactly where she was. Panic hit first, pure and primal. Dellen threw herself against the boulder, blocking the entrance, shoulder screaming with impact, accomplishing nothing. The stone was massive, wedged tight. She couldn't move it from this side, not without leverage she didn't have. She forced herself to stop, to breathe, to think. Panic killed people in the wilderness faster than exposure or dehydration. She'd learned that truth in her ranger days, had seen it proven again and again. She stepped back from the blocked entrance and took inventory. Assets: LED headlamp with fresh batteries, about 8 hours of light. Water bottle, 3/4 full. Protein bars in her jacket pocket. Phone with no signal but a half charge. Basic first aid kit. Pry bar and small hammer she'd left near the entrance when she'd first come in. The pictures on her phone proving what she'd found. Liabilities: trapped in a sealed tunnel system with limited air supply, though the steady draft she'd felt earlier suggested ventilation somewhere. Unknown time before anyone would miss her. Probably not until tomorrow, when her next client appointment went unanswered. Sheriff Talley, who just implied involvement in Danny's murder, knew exactly where she was. She had to find another way out. Danny's diary had mentioned connecting passages, references to the old Ashford mine system. If this tunnel dated to 1804, it predated the commercial mining operations by decades, but the later miners might have intersected these older passages. She needed to explore deeper, needed to find whatever connection Danny had discovered. Dellen retrieved the pry bar and hammer, checked her headlamp, and moved back into the chamber with the inscriptions. Beyond it, the passage continued into deeper darkness. She marked her route with chalk from her first aid kit, drawing arrows on the walls every 20 paces. Getting lost in a cave system was a death sentence. The tunnel descended gradually, the hand-cut stone giving way to rougher natural formations. She passed side passages, narrow crevices that twisted into blackness, but stuck to the main corridor that showed evidence of use, the floor worn smoother, the ceiling darkened by old smoke. Someone had traveled this route regularly, long ago. After perhaps 200 yards, she found the first artifact that hadn't been in the habitation chamber. A leather satchel, rotted almost to pieces, tucked into a niche in the wall. She opened it carefully and found papers inside, protected by the dry air but fragile as ash, account ledgers, written in faded ink. She photographed each page, squinting at the old-fashioned handwriting. The entries dated from 1804 to 1805. Supplies delivered to the ridge site: flour, dried meat, lamp oil, blankets, signed receipts from someone named Ashford. Payments for silence to various names, most of which appeared in Danny's notes as founding families of the town. Proof that the sealed family had been supplied, at least initially. Proof that multiple people knew they were here. The final entries made her sick. The supplies stopped in late 1805. The last notation read simply, "No further provision necessary, sealed to be made permanent." Matter resolved. They'd starved them to death, or hoped they would. Dellen thought of the toys she'd found, the child-sized remains that might still be deeper in this system, and rage burned through her fear. She continued forward, more determined than ever. The tunnel opened into a larger cavern, this one showing no evidence of human modification, a natural cathedral in the mountain's heart. Stalactites dripped from the ceiling. Her headlamp beam couldn't reach the far walls. She picked her way carefully across the uneven floor, testing each step before committing her weight. On the far side, she found what she'd been hoping for: another passage, but this one showed different stonework, rougher cuts, tool marks from steel drills, and dynamite scarring. Mining work from the 1800s, decades after the original tunnel. Someone had broken through from the commercial mine system into these older passages. Had Danny found this connection? Was this how he'd gotten in and out without breaking the seal? And if so, had Sheriff Talley's father followed him here, cornered him in these dark passages, and made sure he never shared what he'd found? The mining tunnel showed evidence of recent use, the same boot prints she'd seen earlier, along with fresh scrape marks on the walls. Someone had been coming and going through this route. Maybe Talley himself, checking on the site periodically to make sure the secret stayed buried. The arrogance of it stunned her. They'd murdered Danny to protect a 2-century-old crime, then just continued living their lives, running the town, enforcing the law. She followed the mining passage for what felt like an hour, climbing gradually upward. Her water was running low, and exhaustion dragged at her, but she couldn't stop. This tunnel had to lead somewhere. The Ashford mine had multiple entrances according to the old maps, most sealed by the Forest Service in the 1960 seconds. But Danny's notes suggested at least one route that remained partially accessible. She found it where the passage narrowed to barely shoulder-width, a section where the ceiling had partially collapsed, leaving a tight squeeze that opened into another chamber beyond. Dellen worked her way through, ignoring the stone, scraping her back and the primitive terror of being wedged underground. On the far side, she stood in what was clearly an old mine gallery, timber supports still mostly intact, rusted rail tracks running along the floor. This she recognized from her ranger days. The Ashford Mine's eastern galleries, officially sealed but accessible if you knew where the collapses could be navigated. She'd been here 20 years ago on a search and rescue call, had memorized the layout. The main entrance was 2 miles of tunnel from here, but there was a ventilation shaft, perhaps half a mile in the other direction. If she could reach it, if it wasn't completely sealed, she might be able to climb out. Dellen checked her phone. Still no signal, but the battery was down to 30%. She needed to conserve it. She took one more set of photographs showing the connection between the old tunnel and the mine system, then dimmed the screen and started walking. The mine was in worse shape than she remembered. 20 years of neglect had weakened the timber supports. Sections of ceiling had collapsed, forcing her to climb over rubble piles and squeeze through gaps. The air was stale and cold, but still moving slightly, a good sign that the ventilation system wasn't completely blocked. She found the shaft where her memory said it would be, a vertical climb of about 40 feet to the surface. The wooden ladder that had once been bolted to the wall had mostly rotted away, but the iron rungs driven into the rock face remained. Dellen tested the first one. It held. She began to climb. Halfway up, one of the rungs pulled free. She caught herself on the rung above, her feet scrabbling for purchase on the stone. Her heart hammered as she hung there, regaining her balance. The pry bar slipped from her belt and clattered down into darkness. She didn't have the breath to curse. The last 15 feet were the worst, every movement a calculated risk on rungs that might give way. But finally her reaching hand touched not stone, but metal grating, the ventilation shaft's cover. She pushed against it and it shifted slightly, not sealed, just weighted down with debris. Dellen braced her feet and pushed with everything she had. The grating lifted, tilted, fell away. Cold mountain air rushed in, the most beautiful thing she'd ever felt. She hauled herself up and out, collapsing on the mountainside in the afternoon sun. She'd made it out. She was alive. And she had evidence that would finally, after 15 years of silence, tell the truth about what happened to her brother. But first, she needed to get somewhere safe. Because Sheriff Boone Talley thought she was still trapped underground, and when he discovered she'd escaped, he would come looking for her. Dellen oriented herself. The ventilation shaft had brought her out on the northern slope of the ridge, about 2 miles from where she'd left her truck. The sun was already dropping toward the western peaks. She'd been underground for nearly 8 hours. Her body ached in a dozen places, her hands were torn and bleeding, and she was desperately thirsty. But she was free. She couldn't go back to her truck. Talley would be watching it, waiting to see if she emerged. She needed to get to someone she could trust with this information, someone outside the web of old families and protected secrets. But who? In 15 years in Ashford Ridge, she'd kept herself deliberately isolated, never forming the kind of relationships that would help her now. Then she remembered Renata Cole. The librarian had moved here from outside, wasn't connected to the founding families. And she'd asked about historical maps, seemed interested in the town's real history, not just the sanitized version. It was a thin thread of hope, but it was all Dellen had. She started hiking northwest, staying off the trails, using the forest cover. Her ranger training came back: move quietly, leave no trace, assume you're being followed. The terrain was brutal, all steep, slopes and deadfall, but she couldn't risk the easier routes where someone might spot her. It took 3 hours to cover what should have been an hour's walk. By the time she reached the outskirts of town, full darkness had fallen. She was limping badly, her water long gone, running on pure determination. She'd circled around to approach from the north, where the library sat on a quiet side street away from Main. The library was dark, closed for the night, but Renata lived in the apartment above it. Dellen could see lights in the upstairs windows. She moved through the shadows to the back entrance, where a set of external stairs led up to the private door. She climbed carefully, every step an effort, and knocked. Silence. Then footsteps inside. The door opened a crack, security chain in place, and Renata's face appeared in the gap. Her eyes went wide. "Dellen? My God, what happened to you? I need to come in, please. I can't explain here." Renata hesitated only a second, then closed the door to release the chain and opened it wide. "Come in, quickly." The apartment was small but warm, full of books and comfortable furniture. Dellen stumbled inside, and Renata locked the door behind her, drawing the curtains. "You're hurt. Sit down. Let me get first aid supplies." "No time for that yet." Dellen pulled out her phone. "I need to send these photos to someone outside of town. Someone who won't be influenced by the sheriff. Do you know anyone like that? You're not making sense. What photos? What's wrong with the sheriff?" "Danny didn't die in an accident." Dellen pulled up the pictures on her phone, the sealed tunnel, the iron plate with its crests and Latin inscription, the chamber with the Hawthorne family's carved message, the ledgers showing payments for silence. He found evidence of a murder, multiple murders, and Sheriff Talley killed him to keep it quiet. Renata went very pale. She sank into a chair, staring at the phone screen as Dellen scrolled through the images. "The sealed records," she whispered. "I always wondered. There are gaps in the town's founding documents, years where nothing was filed. But I thought it was just poor record-keeping. It was a cover-up. A family was sealed in that tunnel and left to die. Daniel Hawthorne, his wife, Denali, their 2 children. Buried alive in 1804 because they had a legal claim to land the founding families wanted." Dellen's voice cracked. "Danny found proof. So they killed him too. Show me everything." For the next hour, Dellen talked Renata through every photograph, every discovery. The librarian listened with growing horror, occasionally asking questions but mostly just absorbing the enormity of what she was seeing. When Dellen finished, Renata sat in silence for a long moment. "I have a friend," she finally said, "at the Colorado Historical Society in Denver. She's honest, thorough, and she's been after me for years to let her research Ashford Ridge's founding period. If I send her this, she'll take it seriously. Do it. Send everything. And send copies to the state police, the FBI, anyone you can think of who has authority over Sheriff Talley." Renata took the phone and began forwarding files. While she worked, Dellen drank 3 glasses of water and let herself collapse onto the couch. Exhaustion pulled at her, demanding she close her eyes, but she forced herself to stay alert. They weren't safe yet. "Done," Renata said after 20 minutes. "I sent your photos to 5 different people, all with detailed explanations. Even if something happens to us, the evidence is out there now." "Smart." Dellen managed a tired smile. "Thank you for believing me. I've lived here 20 years and never quite felt like I belonged. Now, I understand why. This town was built on a crime, and the families that profited from it have been protecting their secret ever since." Renata handed back the phone. "What do we do now?" "We wait. It'll take time for your boat. Contacts to review the evidence and take action. Meanwhile, Talley thinks I'm still trapped in that tunnel. As long as he believes that, we have an advantage." A sound from downstairs made them both freeze. The library's front door opening, footsteps on the stairs to the public floor. Then voices, male, authoritative. Someone was searching the library. "Is there another way out?" Dellen whispered. "Fire escape on the east side. But Dellen, if they find you, they won't." She moved to the window, eased it open. The fire escape was old metal, probably noisy, but they were out of options. "If anyone asks, you haven't seen me. You don't know anything about this. Understand? I'm not letting you face this alone. You've already helped more than you know. Getting that evidence out, that's what matters. The rest is just survival until help arrives." Dellen squeezed Renata's hand. "Thank you." She climbed out onto the fire escape and started down, moving as quietly as she could. The metal creaked under her weight but held. She reached the ground and melted into the shadows behind the building just as she heard Renata's apartment door being knocked on. Loud, official knocking. The sheriff's department. Dellen moved through the darkness, heading for the forest beyond town. She couldn't stay in Ashford Ridge. She needed to hide, to stay free until the authorities she'd contacted could act on the evidence. The mountains had hidden terrible secrets for 2 centuries. Now they would have to hide her for just a few more days. Behind her, the town lights seemed to burn with new menace. Every window could hide eyes watching for her. Every shadow might conceal someone working to protect the old family's crimes. She'd lived on the margins of this community for 15 years, never quite belonging. Now she understood she'd been better off that way. The price of acceptance in Ashford Ridge was complicity in murder. She headed into the trees, into the cold mountain. Night. And kept moving. Danny had died searching for truth. She would stay alive to make sure it was finally told. The abandoned fire lookout tower stood on a peak 3 miles from town, accessible only by a steep trail that few tourists attempted. Dellen had maintained the trail during her ranger days, knew every switchback and vantage point. The tower itself was a relic from the 1952, scheduled for demolition but never quite getting the funding. It was the perfect place to hide shelter from the elements, a view of anyone approaching, and remote enough that random hikers were unlikely to stumble across her. She reached it just before dawn, her body screaming with exhaustion. The tower's ground-level door hung open on broken hinges. Inside, she found evidence of occasional use by backpackers, empty food wrappers, a fire ring, some abandoned camping gear. She climbed the interior stairs to the observation room at the top, 40 feet above the ground. The view was spectacular. She could see Ashford Ridge laid out below like a map, could trace the road leading to the eastern ridge where the sealed tunnel lay hidden. In the growing light, she watched a sheriff's department vehicle driving slowly through town, searching for her. Dellen allowed herself 2 hours of sleep, curled in a corner of the observation room with her jacket as a blanket. When she woke, the sun was fully up and her phone was down to 15% battery. She had 3 missed calls from a Denver number, probably Renata's contact at the Historical Society. She wanted desperately to call back, but she needed to save the battery for emergencies. Instead, she took stock of her situation. She had no food except the protein bars she'd carried into the tunnel already eaten. No water source up here. Her clothes were torn and filthy. She had minor injuries on her hands and knees, nothing life-threatening but painful. She could last maybe 3 days without water, a week without food. Then, her body would start shutting down. How long would it take for the authorities to act on the evidence? A day to verify? 2 days to organize a response? She had to assume the best case was 48 hours. She had to survive that long. Movement on the trail below caught her attention. 2 figures climbing toward the tower, moving with purpose. She pulled back from the window and watched through a gap in the boards. As they got closer, she recognized Sheriff Talley's bulky frame. The person with him was younger, also in uniform, his son Marcus, a deputy. They reached the tower and stopped at the base. Dellen held her breath. "Check inside," Boone Talley's voice carried up through the broken boards. "She knows these mountains. She might have holed up here." Marcus's response was quieter, but Dellen caught the edge of reluctance in it. "Dad, are we sure about this? If she really did get out, if she has evidence, she has nothing that can't be explained away. A sealed tunnel? Old mining operations, unstable and dangerous, exactly why we tell people to stay out of these areas." Some historical documents? Could be forgeries. We've kept this quiet for over 200 years. We're not losing it now because some woman got curious. You said the same thing about her brother. The words hung in the cold air. Dellen's hands clenched into fists. Dellen Hart was different. He was digging into sealed town records, talking to tribal councils about land claims. He was going to expose everything, the original crime, the land theft, all of it. I did what had to be done. Boone's voice was flat, unapologetic. Just like my father did what had to be done when someone else got too curious in the 60s, just like his father before him. That's the price of protecting our family's legacy. By murdering people? Marcus sounded sick. By doing what's necessary. Now check the damn tower. Footsteps on the stairs. Dellen looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the observation room was nearly empty. The only option was outside a narrow catwalk that circled the tower's exterior. She eased the door open and slipped out, closing it silently behind her. The catwalk was terrifying, just metal grating with a waist-high railing, 40 feet of empty air to the rocky ground below. Dellen pressed her back against the tower's wall and edged around to the far side, away from the interior stairs. The wind up here was constant and cold, pulling at her clothes and hair. She heard Marcus reach the observation room, the sound of his footsteps on the old floor. A long pause. Had he seen something? Had she left some trace of her presence? Nothing up here, Marcus finally called down. Just trash from hikers. Check the catwalk. Dellen's heart stopped. If he came outside, he'd see her immediately. There was nowhere to go except over the railing, and that was just a slower way to die. She looked down at the drop, calculating angles. If she jumped and aimed for that boulder pile, if she rolled right no, it was suicide. But if Marcus found her, if Boone got his hands on her, that was also death. At least this way, she'd die on her own terms. The door opened. Marcus stepped out onto the catwalk. Dellen tensed, ready to vault the railing. Their eyes met. Marcus froze. For a long moment they stared at each other, Dellen pressed against the tower wall like a cornered animal, Marcus standing in the doorway with his hand on his weapon. She could see the conflict in his face. Duty, fear, something that might have been shame. Nothing out here either, Marcus called down to his father. He held Dellen's gaze, put a finger to his lips, then stepped back inside and closed the door. Dellen sagged against the wall, shaking. Marcus had seen her. He'd had her dead to rights. And he'd lied to his father. She waited on the catwalk until she heard them leave, climbing back down the trail. Even then she waited another hour, making sure they were truly gone. Finally she crept back inside and sank to the floor, her legs refusing to hold her anymore. Marcus Tally had let her go. Why? Conscience? Or was it a trap, letting her run so they could follow her to wherever the evidence was hidden? No, Renata had already sent the files. The evidence was beyond their reach now. So maybe Marcus really had chosen mercy over duty. Maybe hearing his father confess to murder had been too much even for a son's loyalty. Or maybe he just wanted plausible deniability when they found her body. Dellen couldn't afford to trust anyone right now, not even a deputy who'd spared her life. She needed to move, find a new hiding place. The tower was compromised now. They knew to look for her in the backcountry. She climbed down the internal stairs and paused at the base, looking out at the trail. Then she noticed something she'd missed before: tire tracks, barely visible in the dirt. Recent tracks, from something larger than a ranger's truck. Someone had driven a vehicle up here, probably weeks ago, based on how weathered they looked. She followed the tracks away from the tower, down a game trail she'd never explored. They led to an old logging road, overgrown but still passable, and there, hidden under a camouflage tarp, was a four-wheeler ATV. Someone had stashed it here for quick access to the backcountry. Based on the registration sticker on the side, it belonged to the sheriff's department, of course. They had escape routes and equipment staged all over these mountains, resources Dellen didn't have. But she had something else: desperation. and the memory of her brother's voice on those old phone messages, trying to tell her what he'd found, begging her to call him back. She hadn't been there for Danny when he needed her. She'd failed him in the most fundamental way. She wouldn't fail him now. She would survive long enough to see his killers brought to justice, or she would die trying. There was no middle ground anymore. Dellen left the ATV where it was too risky to use, too easy to track. Instead, she continued on foot, heading deeper into wilderness, putting distance between herself and anyone who might be hunting her. The mountains were vast. She just had to stay hidden for 2 more days. 2 days didn't sound like much. But when you were alone, injured, without food or water, being hunted by people who'd already killed once to protect their secrets, 2 days felt like forever. By midday, Dellen had found water, a cold spring trickling from rocks on the north face of the mountain. She drank deeply, filled her empty water bottle, and allowed herself to rest in the shelter of a boulder overhang. Her phone battery was down to 8%. She powered it off completely, saving it for genuine emergency. The reality of her situation was settling in. She'd bought herself time by escaping the tunnel and getting the evidence out through Renata, but she was still trapped. She couldn't return to town without being arrested, or worse. She couldn't call for help without revealing her location. She was effectively marooned in familiar territory that had suddenly become hostile ground. She thought about Marcus Talley's face when he'd seen her on the catwalk. The young deputy had grown up here, probably heard family stories about honor and legacy, about protecting what the founding families had built. Then he'd learned that legacy was built on murder, that his father had killed to protect it, that his grandfather and great-grandfather had done the same. How did someone process that kind of truth? The afternoon stretched long. Dellen dozed fitfully, waking at every sound: a branch breaking, a bird taking flight, the distant rumble of a plane overhead. The exhaustion was catching up with her, making her slow and stupid. She needed food. She needed real rest. She needed to get out of these mountains. As the sun started its descent toward evening, she heard voices, multiple people, moving through the forest below her position. Search party. She pressed herself against the boulder and listened. Spread out. Check every cave and overhang. She's got to be up here somewhere. That was Boone Talley's voice, closer than she'd like. Lloyd, you and your boys take the eastern slope. Marcus, you're with me. Dad, we've been searching for hours. Maybe she made it to the highway, flagged down help, and said what? That the sheriff tried to kill her? Who's going to believe a homeless woman living in her truck over a third-generation lawman? Boone's voice dripped contempt. Besides, if she'd gotten out, we'd have heard by now. State police would be all over this. No, she's still up here, probably injured, definitely scared. We just need to be patient. The voices moved away, the search party spreading out through the terrain below. Dellen waited until she couldn't hear them anymore, then carefully climbed higher, away from their search pattern. The rock face above her position looked challenging but climbable. She'd done harder ascents in her ranger days, though she'd been younger then and not running on empty. She made it halfway up before her grip failed. Her hand slipped on loose rock, and suddenly she was falling, tumbling down 15 feet of slope before slamming into a tree trunk. The impact drove the air from her lungs. She lay there stunned, tasting blood, waiting for the pain to tell her what she'd broken. Nothing felt broken. Miracle of miracles. But her ribs screamed where she'd hit the tree, and fresh cuts wept blood from her arms and face. She'd also made enough noise falling that anyone within 100 yards would have heard. Voices again, excited now, converging on her position. Over here! I heard something. Dellen forced herself up and stumbled forward, moving as quickly as her battered body would allow. The terrain was treacherous, all loose scree and hidden drops. She rounded a boulder and nearly fell. Into a ravine, a narrow cut in the mountain, maybe 20 feet deep, with a creek at the bottom. No way down except jumping, and that would finish what the earlier fall had started. She turned to find another route and came face to face with Lloyd Pritchard. The old store owner stood 10 feet away, breathing hard from the climb, his face grim. He held a hunting rifle, not pointed at her, but ready. "End of the line, Dellen. Lloyd, you don't want to do this." "I don't want to, but I will. Just like Boone's father did to that college kid in '67 who was researching Ute land claims. Just like Boone did to your brother." Lloyd's voice was tired, almost apologetic. "You have to understand. It's not personal. It's about protecting what our family's built. My great-great-grandfather was one of the men who sealed that tunnel. He made a hard choice for what he thought was right. We've been living with that choice ever since. It was murder, multiple murders, and you've been compounding that crime for 200 years. We built this town. We made something from nothing in these mountains. So what if the foundation wasn't perfect? Show me any town, any fortune, any legacy that doesn't have blood somewhere in its history." Lloyd finally raised the rifle, pointing it at her chest. "I'm sorry. I always liked you. But this is bigger than one person. The evidence is already out there. Killing me won't stop it. Maybe not. But it'll buy us time to prepare our story, to get our lawyers ready. And one more body in these mountains, tragic accident, woman in over her head, just like her brother, that's easier to manage than a live witness." Dellen backed up until her heels hit the edge of the ravine. Behind her was a 20-foot drop onto rocks and water. In front of her was Lloyd and his rifle. The old man's hands weren't entirely steady, but at this range it didn't matter. He couldn't miss. "Lloyd, please," a voice interrupted from the trees. "Put the gun down, Lloyd." Marcus Tally stepped into view, his service weapon drawn and pointed at Lloyd. The deputy's face was pale but determined. "I said put it down. Now, boy, you don't know what you're doing. This is family business. No, it's murder, and I'm not going to let you do it." Marcus's voice shook, but his aim didn't waver. "My father's already going to prison for what he did to Dellen Hart. I'm not going to watch you add another body to that count." Lloyd's face went red. "Your father did what he had to do, what his father and grandfather did before him. This is who we are, Marcus. This is our duty. Our duty is to protect people, not murder them to cover up old crimes." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Last chance. Put the rifle down, or I will shoot you." For a long moment, the three of them stood frozen. Lloyd with his hunting rifle pointed at Dellen, Marcus with his service weapon pointed at Lloyd, Dellen trapped at the edge of the ravine. The only sound was the wind, in the pines, and the distant call of a crow. Then Boone Tally emerged from the trees behind his son. He had his own weapon drawn, and it was pointed at Marcus's back. "I'm disappointed in you, son," Boone said quietly. "I thought you understood what was at stake. I thought I'd raised you better." Marcus's whole body went rigid. He didn't turn around, didn't lower his weapon. "Dad, this is wrong. What we're doing, what our family has done, it's wrong. It's survival. It's protecting our own. And if you're not with us, then you're against us." Boone's voice was cold, empty of anything that sounded like fatherhood. "Now lower your weapon and step aside. Let Lloyd finish this." Dellen watched Marcus's face, saw the war happening there. She'd put him in an impossible position, forced him to choose between his father and his conscience. Whatever he decided in the next few seconds would determine all their fates. The young deputy took a deep breath. Then he spoke, his voice steady, despite the gun pointed at his back. "No. I'm placing you both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent." The sound exploded through the quiet forest. Marcus staggered forward, hit the ground hard. His weapon fell from his hand. Lloyd swung his rifle toward Dellen, finger tightening on the trigger. Dellen jumped backward into the ravine. Cold water shocked the breath from Dellen's lungs. She'd hit the creek feet first, the impact jarring every bone, but the water was deep enough that she didn't break anything on the rocks. The current grabbed her immediately, pulling her downstream through the narrow ravine. She fought to keep her head above water, gasping for air, being slammed against rocks and boulders as the creek rushed through its channel. Above her, she heard Lloyd's voice. "Did you hit her?" "I don't know. She went into the water, checked downstream." The creek was fast and freezing, fed by snowmelt from Distrime, the higher peaks. Hypothermia would kill her in minutes if she didn't get out. But getting out meant being caught by men with guns who'd already shot one of their own to protect their secret. She let the current carry her, using what strength she had left to avoid the worst of the rocks, trying to stay conscious as the cold sapped her body heat. The ravine opened up after perhaps 200 yards, the creek slowing as it spread into a wider channel. Dellen managed to grab an overhanging branch and pull herself to the bank. She crawled onto dry land and lay there, shaking violently, her body trying to generate heat it didn't have. She had to move, had to find shelter, had to get warm or she'd die here on the creek bank. With enormous effort, she pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet. The world tilted sickeningly. She was hypothermic, going into shock, her body shutting down. There, a fallen tree, its root ball creating a small shelter. She crawled underneath it and curled into the tightest ball she could manage, trying to conserve what body heat remained. Her clothes were soaked, leaching more warmth away. She needed to strip them off, but couldn't make her hands work properly. The shaking was uncontrollable now. Time became strange. She might have been under that tree for minutes or hours. At some point the shaking stopped, which she knew from her training was a bad sign. It meant her core temperature had dropped critically low. She was dying, she realized with odd detachment. Dying in the same mountains where Danny had died, killed by the same men for the same reason. Voices penetrated her fading awareness. Not the searchers, different voices, female, urgent, hands touching her, checking her pulse. "She's alive, but barely. We need to get her warm now." Someone was stripping off her wet clothes, wrapping her in something dry and warm. A survival blanket? A sleeping bag? She couldn't tell, couldn't focus. She felt herself being lifted, carried. The movement jostled her injuries, and she tried to cry out, but no sound came. "We've got you. You're safe now. Just hold on." Dellen slipped into darkness. When she woke, she was in a tent with a propane heater glowing orange in the corner. She was wrapped in multiple sleeping bags, dry clothes on her body that weren't hers. The shaking had stopped. She was warm, alive. A woman sat cross-legged nearby, watching her with concerned dark eyes. She looked to be in her early 40s, with long black hair in a braid and features that marked her as indigenous. "Welcome back. You were pretty close to not making it." "Who?" Dellen's voice came out as a croak. "Water first. Small sips." The woman helped her drink from a canteen. The water was cool and clean, and the best thing Dellen had ever tasted. "I'm Dr. Simone Valdez. I'm an anthropologist from Denver. And you, I'm guessing, are Dellen Hart." The name sent adrenaline spiking through Dellen's system. She tried to sit up. "How do... You know my name? Easy, take it slow. You've been out for about 6 hours." Valdez gently pushed her back down. "I know your name because I've been looking for you. Your friend, Renata Cole, sent me the photographs you took in the tunnel. She was worried when you disappeared, so I drove down yesterday and started asking questions. The locals weren't helpful, but I'm used to that. I've been researching Ashford Ridge for 3 years. Why?" Dellen's head was clearing, pieces starting to fit together. "What's your interest in this place?" "The sealed tunnel you found, the Hawthorne family buried inside it." Valdez's voice went soft. "Daniel Hawthorne married Denali of the Mountain People in 1802. Denali was Ute, daughter of a leader. They had 2 children. In 1804, the family disappeared from all historical records. The official story was they relocated east, but my family's oral history says different." Dellen stared at her. "You're descended from them, from Denali's sister, the..." The story has been passed down through 6 generations that Denali and her children were sealed alive in the mountain by white settlers who wanted their land. My great-great-great-grandmother spent her whole life trying to find where they'd been buried, never succeeded. I've been searching for 3 years, using geological surveys and land records. Valdez's eyes were bright with unshed tears. When Renata sent me your photos, I finally had proof. My family's story was true. The tent flap opened, and another woman entered, younger, maybe mid-20s, also indigenous. She carried a pot of something that smelled like heaven. "Soup's ready. How's our patient?" "Awake and coherent," Valdez introduced the newcomer. "This is my research assistant, Kai. She's the one who spotted you under that tree. We'd been searching since we heard the gunshot." "Marcus." Dellen tried to sit up again, this time succeeding. "A deputy named Marcus Talley, his father shot him. We have to help him. He already did. Found him about an hour after we found you." Kai ladled soup into a cup and handed it to Dellen. He was hit in the shoulder, bleeding pretty bad but conscious. "We got him stabilized and hidden in a different location. The sheriff and his crew spent hours searching for both of you, but we know these mountains better than they do." Dellen's hands shook as she held the soup cup. "Marcus saved my life. His own father shot him for it. He told us the whole story while we were patching him up," Valdez said, "about how the founding families have been covering up the tunnel for generations. About your brother. About how he finally couldn't be part of it anymore." She paused. "He gave us something. Evidence his father didn't know he had." Valdez pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind police used for interviews. "Marcus has been recording his father's conversations for 2 years. He suspected something was wrong but didn't know how deep it went until recently. This recorder has dozens of conversations, including several where Boone Talley explicitly discusses killing your brother and planning to kill you." Dellen took the recorder with shaking hands. This was it. This was proof that couldn't be denied or explained away. Actual confession from the killer's own mouth. "There's more," Valdez continued. "While searching the tunnel system, I found the connection to the old Ashford mine. I followed it deeper and discovered something your photos didn't show. Beyond the chamber where the Hawthorne family died, there's another section. A natural cave system that Daniel and Denali were using as storage." "Storage for what?" Valdez smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. "For evidence. Turns out Daniel was a meticulous record keeper. He documented everything the land claims, the treaties, the pressure from the founding families to sell his property. He knew they were planning something, so he hid copies of all his legal documents, all his correspondence. It's all there, preserved in the dry air for over 200 years. Legal proof that the land those families built their fortunes on was stolen. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about murder anymore. It was about fundamental questions of property ownership, about indigenous land rights, about the very foundation of Ashford Ridge as a town. The founding families didn't just kill the Hawthorns," Dellen said slowly. "They committed land theft on a massive scale, and their descendants have been profiting from it ever since." Valdez's voice was hard. "Every business, every property, every legacy in that town, built on stolen land and covered-up murder. Well, not anymore. Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with a federal prosecutor who specializes in indigenous land claims. With your photos, Daniel's documents, and Marcus's recordings, we're going to tear this whole thing open." For the first time in days, Dellen felt something like hope. Danny hadn't died for nothing. The truth he'd been searching for would finally see light. Justice, delayed by 2 centuries, was finally coming to Ashford Ridge. "What about Sheriff Talley?" she asked. "He's still out there, still armed, still dangerous." "State police are already on their way," Kai said. "Marcus managed to send a message before his father shot him. They should be here within the hour. Boone Talley's reign is over." Dellen finished the soup and felt strength returning to her limbs. She wasn't safe yet, none of them were, not while Boone and Lloyd remained free. But the worst was past. She'd survived. The evidence was secured. And somewhere in these mountains, Marcus Tally was alive, having chosen conscience over corruption. The story that had cost Danny his life was about to be told. And this time, no one would be able to bury it. The state police arrived just after dark, 4 vehicles with lights flashing, converging on Ashford Ridge from the highway. Dellen watched from the relative safety of Valdez's camp, positioned on a ridge that gave them a clear view of the town below. The police presence stirred up the town, like kicking an anthill. She could see people emerging from buildings, gathering in clusters, pointing at the official vehicles. "They're going to be looking for Boone," Valdez said, standing beside her with binoculars. "And Lloyd, and probably half a dozen others involved in this mess. They won't find them easily. These mountains have 100 places to hide. Dellen knew that better than anyone. Boone knows every inch of this backcountry. He could evade search parties for weeks if he wanted to." "But why would he?" Kai asked. "He has to know it's over. The evidence is out. Running just makes him look guilty." "He is guilty," Marcus's voice came from behind them. The young deputy was sitting against a tree, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale with pain and exhaustion. Valdez had given him antibiotics and pain medication from their field kit, but he needed real medical attention soon. "My father isn't going to surrender quietly. He's been preparing for this possibility his whole life. Every Tally man has. It's part of how we were raised. Protect the secret at any cost, and if the secret gets out, make sure you can disappear." Dellen turned to him. "What do you mean, disappear?" "There's an old Ute cave system on the western ridge. My great-grandfather expanded it, turned it into a kind of bunker. Supplies, weapons, emergency cache. Everything you'd need to survive off-grid for months. I've only been there once, when my dad showed it to me on my 18th birthday. He called it the last resort." Marcus shifted position and winced. "If he's going to ground anywhere, it's there." "Can you show us where?" "I can try, but I don't know how much use I'll be like this." He gestured to his injured shoulder. "And Dellen, you should know before he shot me, my father said something that's been bothering me," he said. "The Hart woman won't get her justice, because justice doesn't matter when you're dead." He wasn't talking about killing you in the moment. He was talking about something he'd already planned. Ice formed in Dellen's chest. "What do you mean?" "I think he's set up a trap, something designed to eliminate anyone who threatens the secret. The bunker he showed me, it had explosives. Military-grade stuff his father had acquired somehow. He said it was for self-defense, but now I'm thinking it was always meant as a scorched earth option." The implications hit Dellen like a physical blow. He's going to destroy evidence. The tunnel, the documents, everything. "More than that," Marcus said grimly. "If he's really gone to the last resort, if he thinks it's all over anyway, he might decide to take out anyone who knows about it. That includes you, me, Renata, these researchers, maybe even parts of the town to cover his escape." Valdez pulled out her phone. "I need to tell the state police about this." "No signal up here," Kai reminded her. "Then we need to get down to the town, warn them about the danger." Dellen was already gathering her few belongings. The soup and rest had restored some of her strength, though she was still moving like a woman twice her age. "You're in no condition," Valdez started to protest. "Neither is Marcus, but this is his father we're talking about. This is my brother's murder. We both have reasons to see this through." Dellen met the anthropologist's eyes. "Besides, you need someone who knows these mountains at night. Someone who can navigate them without lights that'll give us away. That's me." A light appeared on the trail below, not coming from town, but from higher up the mountain. Then another, and another. Flashlights or lanterns, moving in a coordinated pattern through the trees. "That's not the search party," Marcus said, struggling to his feet. "That's something else." They watched as the lights converged on a point midway up the western ridge. Dellen recognized the location, an old shepherd's meadow that had been abandoned for decades. What was significant about that spot? "It's directly above the bunker entrance," Marcus whispered. "They're gathering there, all of them." "Who's them?" Kai asked. "Everyone my father could trust, everyone with family ties to the founding crimes. He's calling in his network, getting everyone to the bunker before the state police can arrest them." Marcus's face was grim. "They're planning something. A coordinated response to the investigation." More lights appeared from different directions, all heading toward the meadow. Dellen counted at least 8 separate groups. This wasn't just Boone and Lloyd, this was an organized effort involving dozens of people. "They've had 200 years to prepare for this day," Valdez said quietly. "They're not going to just surrender and hope for the best in court. We need to stop them." Dellen started down the slope, moving as quickly as her battered body would allow. "If they destroy the evidence in that tunnel, if they blow those caves or seal them permanently, we lose everything. Daniel's documents, the proof of what happened, it'll all be gone. The photos," Valdez started, "can be disputed, called fakes or misinterpretations. We need the physical evidence." Dellen didn't wait to see if they were following. She knew these mountains, knew the fastest routes. She could reach the western ridge before those lights converged, maybe get a sense of what Boone was planning. Behind her, she heard the others scrambling to catch up. Marcus moving despite his injury, Valdez and Kai grabbing emergency supplies. They were all committed now, all being pulled into the final confrontation. The hike took 40 minutes, pushing through darkness without lights, guided only by memory and instinct. Dellen's body protested every step, her ribs ached where she'd hit the tree, her hands were raw from climbing through the mine, and hypothermia's effect still lingered in her muscles. But she pushed through it, driven by something beyond physical capability. They reached a vantage point overlooking the meadow just as the various groups were arriving. In the clearing below, perhaps 30 people had gathered, old men like Lloyd, younger men and women, even a few teenagers, all standing around a central fire, their faces illuminated by the flames. Dellen recognized several of them. Business owners, the mayor, members of the town council. The establishment of Ashford Ridge gathered for some terrible purpose. Boone Tally stood at the center, addressing them. His voice carried up through the cold night air. "Most of you know why we're here. Some of you are learning the full truth for the first time. 221 years ago, our ancestors made a hard choice. They took land that would make this town possible, and they did what was necessary to secure that land. What they did wasn't pretty. It wasn't easy. But it was necessary for our survival, for our prosperity." Murmurs from the crowd. Some agreement, some uncertainty. Now that choice is being questioned. Evidence has been found. Stories are being told. The descendants of those who lost want to reclaim what they say was stolen. State police are in our town tonight. Federal investigators will come tomorrow. They want to tear down everything we've built, everything our families have worked for across 2 centuries. Lloyd Pritchard stepped forward. "So what do we do, Boone? How do we fight this?" "We don't fight it. We can't." Boone's voice was heavy with resignation. "The evidence is out there now. The truth about what happened to the Hawthorne family is going to come to light no matter what we do. But we can control how that story is told. We can make sure our side is heard." He pulled out a stack of papers. "I've prepared a statement, a collective confession and explanation. We acknowledge what our ancestors did. We express regret. We offer to negotiate a settlement with any living descendants of the Hawthorne family. We try to make this right, as much as anything can be made right after this long." Stunned silence from the crowd. This wasn't what Dellen had expected. No violence, no destruction, no last desperate stand. Boone Tally was proposing surrender. "Some of you won't want to sign this," Boone continued. "I understand. But those who do will present a united front, will show remorse, cooperation, good faith. Maybe we can preserve something of what our families built. What about you? Someone called from the crowd. What about the Hart kid you killed? Boone's shoulders sagged. That's on me. Not on any of you, not on our ancestors. I made that choice alone, and I'll face the consequences alone. Marcus tried to stop me today. He tried to do the right thing, and I shot my own son for it. But the rest of you have a chance to handle this differently than I did. Marcus, standing beside Dellen, made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh, or both. He's actually doing it. He's actually trying to make it right. It's too late for that, Dellen said flatly. Your father murdered my brother. No statement, no negotiation, no settlement changes that. I know. Marcus's voice was thick with grief. But at least he's not taking anyone else down with him. That's something. Below, the crowd was breaking into smaller groups, arguing, some crying, some angry. The unified front Boone had hoped for was fracturing before their eyes. Too many secrets had been revealed, too much trust had been shattered. The lies that held this community together for 2 centuries were finally coming apart. Valdez touched Dellen's arm. Look. State police vehicles were approaching the meadow, their lights visible through the trees. Someone had tracked the gathering, or maybe Marcus's earlier message had included this location. Either way, the opportunity for the conspirators to control their narrative was evaporating. They would be arrested tonight, charged with various crimes, forced to face justice in courts they couldn't control. We should go down there, Valdez said. Make sure they secure the tunnel, preserve the evidence properly. This is too important to leave to chance. Dellen nodded. But as they started down the slope toward the meadow, an explosion lit up the night. Not from the meadow. From the direction of the eastern ridge, from where the sealed tunnel entrance stood, hidden among the burn scars. Someone had just destroyed the evidence after all. The explosion echoed across the mountains, a deep boom that sent birds scattering from the trees. In the meadow below, everyone froze, conspirators and police alike, staring toward the eastern ridge, where flames now licked into the night sky. No! Valdez breathed beside Dellen. All that history, all those documents, but Dellen was already running, moving on instinct before thought, racing back toward the eastern ridge. Her body screamed protest, but she ignored it. The tunnel, the evidence. Everything Danny had died for was burning. Footsteps pounded behind her. Dellen, wait! Marcus's voice, strained with pain but determined. The young deputy was following despite his injury. So were Valdez and Kai, and behind them she could hear more people, state police officers, joining the chase, unsure what they were chasing toward but responding to the urgency. The eastern ridge was 3 miles from the meadow through rough terrain. Dellen covered it in 30 minutes, driven by desperation and rage. When she burst through the trees into the burn zone, she found the tunnel entrance collapsed and burning. Someone had packed it with explosives, brought down the entire rock face. Flames poured from gaps in the rubble, smoke rising thick and black into the night sky. A figure stood silhouetted against the flames. Lloyd Pritchard, holding a detonator, his face streaked with tears and ash. I couldn't let them have it, he said when he saw Dellen. His voice was hollow, defeated. Boone was ready to surrender, to let them tear apart everything we built. But I remember what my grandfather told me, what his father told him. This secret is our responsibility, our burden. We don't get to just give it up because things got hard. You destroyed evidence of a crime. Dellen shouted over the roar of the flames. You destroyed a family's final resting place. I protected my family's legacy, Lloyd shot back, just like I was taught to do. Just like every Pritchard for 6 generations has done. His hand holding the detonator was shaking. But it doesn't matter now. Without the physical evidence, it's just stories. Your photos could be anything. That recording could be faked. A good lawyer will tear it all apart. Marcus arrived, gasping, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. "Lloyd, put the detonator down. This is over. For you, maybe. You betrayed your family, your heritage, shot by your own father because you forgot what we were fighting to protect." Lloyd's voice turned bitter. "But I haven't forgotten. I won't forget." State police officers were emerging from the trees, weapons drawn, spreading out to surround Lloyd. But the old man didn't seem to care. He looked at Dellen with something that might have been pity. "Your brother was a good kid. Earnest, believed in truth and justice like they were simple things, uncomplicated." Lloyd shook his head. "I tried to warn him off. So did others. But he kept digging. Boone made the call to stop him permanently. I went along with it because it was necessary. Because it's always been necessary." "You're confessing?" one of the state police officers said, approaching carefully. "I'm explaining. There's a difference." Lloyd looked back at the burning tunnel. "The evidence is gone now. You can arrest us, charge us, drag us through courts. But without proof, without bodies, without documents, all you have are accusations. And this town will close ranks. It always has." "We have the recordings," Marcus said. "We have my father's confession, coerced by his son during a mental health crisis. That's what the lawyers will argue." Lloyd smiled without humor. "I've been thinking about this possibility for 50 years. We've all thought about it. We've had contingency plans since before you were born." Valdez pushed forward. "You can't erase what happened. Those people died in there. Daniel, Denali. Their children, they deserve justice. Their story deserves to be told. Their story is gone. Buried with them, now forever." Lloyd dropped the detonator and raised his hands as the police moved in. "Take me in, process me, charge me if you want. But you'll never prove what really happened in 1804, and without that proof, this town will survive. Our families will survive. Just like we always have." The officers handcuffed Lloyd and read him his rights. Dellen stood staring at the burning tunnel entrance. He was right in one terrible way. The physical evidence was gone. The bodies that could have been tested for DNA, the documents in Daniel's own handwriting, the artifacts that told the story of the Hawthorne family's imprisonment, all reduced to ash and rubble. But Lloyd was also wrong. Because while he'd been setting his explosives and destroying the eastern entrance, he'd forgotten something crucial. Marcus had mentioned another entrance, a connection through the old mine system, the same route Dellen had used to escape. The same route that led deeper into the cave system, to the storage areas where Daniel Hawthorne had hidden his most important records. Dellen caught Valdez's eye and saw the same realization there. Lloyd had destroyed one entrance. But the evidence itself might still be intact, accessible from the mine side. They just had to get there before anyone else did. Dellen didn't wait for permission. She grabbed Valdez and Kai and pulled them aside while the state police processed Lloyd's arrest. The mine entrance on the north side. The evidence might still be intact if we can reach it through the old galleries. "We need to tell the police," Valdez protested, "and give them time to get equipment, to form a proper search team, to do everything by the book." Dellen shook her head. "Lloyd was prepared for this. You heard him. They've had contingency plans for generations. How many other people know about that mine connection? How many others might be heading there right now to finish what Lloyd started?" Marcus overheard and moved closer, his face pale but determined. "She's right. Lloyd might think he was working alone, but there are others who'd want the evidence destroyed. My father's entire generation was raised on these secrets. We have to move now." "You're injured," Kai pointed out. "I can walk, and I know that mine system better than any of you." Marcus looked at the state police lieutenant coordinating the scene. "Give me 10 minutes to brief them, then we go. If we wait longer, we risk losing everything." Those 10 minutes felt eternal. Dellen watched the flames consuming the tunnel entrance, knowing that every second counted. Finally, Marcus returned with official authorization and 2 state police officers assigned to accompany them. The rest would maintain the scene here and continue processing Lloyd's arrest. The hike to the old mine entrance took an hour, moving through darkness with only flashlights to guide them. The entrance was sealed with a rusted gate that Marcus had a key for, apparently part of his duties, as deputy had included periodic safety checks of abandoned mines. Beyond the gate, the tunnel yawned dark and cold. "Stay close. Watch for unstable sections," Dellen instructed as they entered. She'd been through here once before during her escape, but that had been survival mode, not careful exploration. Now she paid attention to the layout, comparing it mentally to the route she'd taken days ago. The mine system was a labyrinth, main galleries branching into side passages, some collapsed, others simply ending at played-out ore veins. Marcus led them deeper, following chalk marks he remembered from childhood explorations with his father. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. They were using knowledge passed down through the conspirators' families to expose the conspiracy itself. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, they reached the hand-carved passage that connected the mine to the older tunnel system. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through, but it was intact. One by one, they worked their way through into the natural cave system beyond. The air was different here, older somehow, heavy with time. Valdez played her light across the walls and gasped. "Look at this workmanship. This wasn't just survival, construction. Someone spent months, maybe years, creating these spaces. They found the main habitation chamber, the one where Dellen had discovered the Hawthorne family's inscription. The explosion hadn't reached this far. Everything was intact, untouched. The carved words still read their silent testimony. Sealed here by those who would steal our land. This way," Marcus said, pointing to a passage Dellen had missed during her first frantic exploration. "My father showed me once, years ago. He said there was a room deeper, in that we were never to enter, never to speak about. I think that's where Daniel Hawthorne stored his documents." The passage led downward, deeper into the mountain, the walls gradually transitioning from carved stone to natural cave formations. They had to duck in places, squeeze through gaps in others. Finally, the passage opened into a chamber that took Dellen's breath away. It was a natural cathedral, 30 feet high and twice that in width, with crystal formations glittering on the walls like stars. But more impressive than the natural beauty were the contents. Stone shelves lined the walls, and on those shelves sat hundreds of items, leather-bound journals, rolled documents, carved wooden boxes, all preserved by the cave's stable temperature and low humidity. "My God," Valdez whispered, "it's all here. Everything." She moved to the nearest shelf and carefully opened one of the journals. Her hands trembled as she read. "This is Daniel's journal from 1803. He's documenting land purchases, treaties with the Ute peoples, agreements with the founding families." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "This is legal proof, indisputable evidence of what happened." The state police officers began photographing everything, documenting the cache before anything was moved. Dellen walked slowly along the shelves, reading labels written in Daniel Hawthorne's careful hand. Land deeds, correspondence, account books, witness, statements. She picked up a sealed envelope marked, "To be opened only in event of my death." He knew they were planning to kill him, and he prepared for it. Marcus leaned against the wall, his injured shoulder finally giving out. All this time, all these murders, all to hide something that was documented and preserved anyway. He laughed, but it was a broken sound. "My father killed Danny for nothing. Lloyd destroyed that tunnel for nothing. The truth was always here, waiting to be found." Kai was examining the far wall when she called out, "There's more! Look at this!" They gathered around where she stood. In the cave wall, someone had carved a memorial, names and dates. Daniel Hawthorne died 1805. Denali Hawthorne died 1806. James and Sarah Hawthorne, their young ages listed beside their names, and below them, in what looked like a different hand, more recent. Found by Marcus Tally Sr., 1967. Preserved by his silence. May God forgive us. Marcus stared at the R. Inscription, his grandfather's name carved in stone. He knew. My grandfather found this place and knew what it proved, and he kept the secret anyway, just like his father before him, just like mine after him. He turned to Dellen. I'm so sorry. I'm so deeply sorry for what my family did to yours. Dellen looked at the young man who'd taken a bullet from his own father rather than be part of the conspiracy, and felt something that had been frozen in her chest since Danny's death finally began to thaw. You broke the cycle, she said quietly. That's what matters now. Above them, faint sounds echoed through the cave system, more people entering the mine, rescue teams or investigators following them in. The truth would come out now, all of it. After 221 years, the Hawthorne family's story would finally be told, and Danny's death would finally mean something. 8 months later, Dellen stood at the entrance to what was now officially designated the Hawthorne Memorial Site. The Forest Service had cleared a proper trail, installed interpretive signs, and built a small visitor center. The tunnel entrance that Lloyd had tried to destroy had been excavated by archaeologists and tribal authorities, and behind safety barriers, visitors could see where the Hawthorne family had spent their final years. The November air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and approaching snow. A crowd of perhaps 200 people had gathered for the dedication ceremony, tribal leaders, state officials, historians, and descendants of the Hawthorne family who'd traveled from across the country. Valdez stood at the podium, addressing the assembly about the significance of the site and the ongoing research into early settler-indigenous relations in Colorado. Dellen stood off to the side, uncomfortable with attention but honored to be here. She wore clean clothes for once, staying in a small apartment the tribal council had offered her while she worked as historical consultant for their land reclamation project. The apartment felt strange after years in her truck, but she was slowly getting used to walls and a proper bed. Marcus Tally sat in the front row, his arm in a sling, though the bullet wound had mostly healed. He'd resigned from the sheriff's department, faced obstruction of justice charges for his years of silence, and received a suspended sentence in exchange for his cooperation and testimony. He was working now as a wilderness guide like Dellen, trying to build a life separate from his family's legacy of secrets. The trial had been swift once the evidence from Daniel Hawthorne's cache was authenticated. Boone Tally was serving life without parole for Danny's murder. Lloyd Pritchard got 20 years for evidence destruction and conspiracy. 3 other members of the founding families received shorter sentences for various degrees of complicity. The convictions hadn't brought Danny back, but they'd brought truth. That had to be enough. The land disputes were still being sorted through courts, complicated questions about property ownership spanning 2 centuries, tribal sovereignty claims, and restitution for historical injustices. The lawyers said it would take years to fully resolve, but Valdez's family, as direct descendants of Denali Hawthorne, had already been awarded preliminary control of a significant portion of the contested land, along with the Spanish gold cache that had been found exactly where Denali's final message had indicated. The gold itself was now in a museum, its historical value far exceeding its material worth. But the legal victory it represented the acknowledgement that the land had been stolen and the theft was being partially rectified, that meant everything to the families who'd carried the story through 6 generations. Valdez finished her speech and invited tribal elders to speak. They talked about the importance of remembering history honestly, of acknowledging pain while working toward healing, of honoring those who'd suffered injustice. They dedicated the memorial stone that had been erected at the tunnel site, a black granite marker listing the names of the Hawthorne family, and an inscription in English and Ute, "Sealed by greed, remembered by truth, freed by courage." When the formal ceremony concluded, people milled around examining the interpretive signs and taking photos. Renata Cole found Dellen and pulled her into a hug. The librarian had been instrumental in preserving documents and coordinating with historians, finally able to fulfill her love of accurate historical record. "You should be proud," Renata said. "Danny would be proud of what you've accomplished. I didn't do this for pride. I did it because it was right." Dellen looked at the memorial stone. "And because my brother died trying to do the same thing. I just finished what he started." Marcus joined them, looking uncomfortable in his dress clothes. "Can we talk for Marcus?" "A minute?" They walked away from the crowd, following the new trail to a viewpoint overlooking the valley. From here you could see Ashford Ridge in the distance, smaller than Dellen remembered, less imposing. The town was changing. Some long-time families had moved away, unable to bear the shame. New people were moving in, drawn by the historical significance and the ongoing research projects. The place was being forced to confront its past and build something new from the ruins of old certainties. "I've been offered a job," Marcus said, "with the Tribal Lands Management Program. They need people who know these mountains, who can help develop responsible tourism and protect culturally significant sites." He looked at Dellen. "I wanted you to know before I accepted. I know my family caused you terrible pain. If you don't want to work in the same organization, I'll turn it down." Dellen studied the young man who'd chosen conscience over comfort, who'd taken a bullet from his own father, rather than be complicit in more killing. "Your family's crimes aren't yours to carry, Marcus. You broke free of that. Don't limit your future because of their past. That's generous, considering. It's not generous. It's necessary." Dellen turned to face him fully. "If we're going to heal from this, if this place is going to become something better than what it was, then we have to believe people can change. That the next generation doesn't have to repeat the mistakes of the previous ones. You proved that's possible. Take the job. Help protect what matters." Relief washed across Marcus's face. "Thank you." After he left, Dellen stood alone at the viewpoint, watching the sun drop toward the western peaks. She thought about Danny, about all the phone messages she'd been too busy to return, about the 15 years she'd spent haunted by guilt and grief. The pain didn't disappear with truth or justice. It would always be there, a permanent scar on her heart. But it had transformed into something she could live with, something that drove her forward rather than holding her back. Valdez appeared beside her, silent and understanding. They'd become close over the past months, bound by shared purpose and mutual respect. The anthropologist had offered Dellen a permanent position on her research team, studying other cases of historical injustice in the region. "Ready to head back?" Valdez asked. "Almost." Dellen pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo she'd saved Danny as a young man, grinning at the camera, holding a hiking backpack and looking eager for adventure. She'd had the photo printed and framed, the first decoration in her new apartment. "I finished it," she said quietly, speaking to her brother, though he'd been gone 15 years. "I found the truth you were looking for. I made sure everyone knows what happened. I made sure it mattered." The mountains didn't answer, but in the evening breeze she felt something like peace. Some secrets stayed buried forever, becoming part of the land itself. But some secrets needed to be brought into the light, no matter how long it took, no matter the cost. Dellen Hart had brought her brother's secret into the light. She'd survived the attempts to silence her. She'd broken open a conspiracy that had lasted 2 centuries. She'd given voice to people who'd been erased from history. And now, finally, she could rest. She turned away from the view and walked back toward the crowd, toward the living, toward whatever came next. The mountains would always be there, vast and ancient and full of stories. But she didn't have to carry all those stories alone anymore. The truth was out, the burden was shared, and somewhere, she hoped, Danny was at peace, knowing his death hadn't been for nothing. The sun dropped below the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the gathering dusk, the memorial stone caught the last light, the names of the Hawthorne family carved, deep and permanent, remembered at last, freed by truth, finally home.